Today's show is the beginning of a 3-part series of some foundational things that we cover in our childbirth classes. We're starting today with the topic of choice. We are huge believers in childbirth classes opening up new doors to becoming autonomous with all of your choices and in taking full ownership of your preparation for birth, along with your preparation for postpartum and parenting. It's kind of a strange transition when you go from being the kid to the one having the kid. Adulting takes on a whole other perspective, and the need for better education around how to do this transition is just necessary. Where do we learn it? Nowhere. Not in high school, not in college. It's just not even talked about. So we open up those doors for exploration in Childbirth Ed. Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Hey, this is Care.
This is Ashley.
We are talking today about choice. Part of the educational shows that we will be doing throughout the podcast start with foundational ones. This is a three-part series. One is on choice, one is on consent, and one is on connection. Because when we have those three things in place, our birth is going to go better than when we don't. And it's what we start with our students. And this particular one is going to be on choice, but you have choice with everything. And I think that is one of the things that I learned through my birth and through my experience as being an educator for so long is we are always an autonomous person. Nobody empowers you to have a good birth. You are already empowered. You make choices in your life all the time. When you get up in the morning, if you're going to drive somewhere, if you're going to eat something, if you're going to pee somewhere, like you always have choice. There's choice in everything. So our goal with this episode is to show you how early those choices actually start. And if there is one episode that you want to send to a friend before they're even thinking of getting pregnant, this is it. If you're finding this at the end of your pregnancy, you might be scuttling to figure out, oh my gosh, I've already made some choices or didn't make some choices and it's led me to a certain place. But remember that choice starts the second you realize it and goes all the way through postpartum, like for the rest of your life. So if you're finding this later rather than earlier, totally fine. But this episode would be great to go to families and friends that you know who are not even thinking about getting pregnant, because we are going to cover insurance, providers, all that kind of stuff. And this specific episode is geared towards providers. And I realize, Ashley realizes, that is a privilege point of view that you get to choose providers, because there are a lot of places in our country, in the world, where it is only one provider for the village or one provider with a 200-mile radius, and that's one hospital that services everybody. But when you do have the opportunity to start with choices, that's where we want you to look earlier rather than later. You're also going to have choice with doulas, educators, education, who's going to support you at your birth, but we are going to focus on provider today. Ashley, did you want to start with anything about that?
Yeah. So it's really important to acknowledge that, where we're coming from in Western society, but in particular, where we practice and the bulk of our audience is going to be located is the United States. And we're working within a private healthcare system that makes it so we can be sort of forced into going down certain paths with our births, to having certain providers at our births, limiting our options, as well as being very expensive. And so when we talk about choice, we want you thinking about this before you make the decision to get pregnant, if you have that opportunity. We know that some babies sneak up on us and surprise us, and you find yourself in the moment being like, oh my God, what do I do? But in particular, if part of your life plan is to start a family by becoming pregnant and having a baby, then you want to be thinking about your insurance situation, your medical situation before that even happens. We have to be conscious and thinking about what insurance we're going to use, because we don't have, nationalized healthcare system. We don't have a system where we can just sort of, safety net fall into it like we have care that is going to be provided for us. We have limitations and rules. In the United States, for people who don't know, our insurance is tied to our employer, or if we don't have an employer that provides it, we can get insurance through our state. But because we are getting it through one path or another, it's still very limited in the options that we have. And so we have to be thinking about what type of insurance we have, and then within that insurance, selecting our provider from the different categories. So just to start off, if you are employed and your employer is a large enough company to provide insurance, you need to know when your open enrollment is. Here's another catch of privatized insurance. You can't just jump on and off insurance all the time. You can jump on when you get hired at a company. That's considered a life change. You can jump on when you get married or when you have a baby. Those are considered life changes. Otherwise, you have to wait for the calendar to roll around to what your company has designated as their quote unquote open enrollment, which is the time period you have, about a month usually, to choose your healthcare plan and sign up.
This is so crazy for people out of the country. I just watched a TikTok where they showed people from all over the world, like the Netherlands and the UK and stuff, like, here are the choices. What would you choose? And they were like, you've got to be kidding me.
I know.
Like, how in the world, with all the industrial nations figuring this out, you guys cannot figure this out? I'm like, because we make money off of humans here. And it really is a lot when you think about PPO versus HMO versus what my employer offers versus, is it worth paying $1,300 a month? Can I afford to pay that for PPO? Right. PPO is when you choose your own provider, where HMO is just one group of doctors that's covered. It's crazy health insurance in America, which is why we're so screwed up.
And what you're talking about is that kind of the next point I was going to make is the reason why most of us will choose a plan is affordability to us, right? But that can really limit our options because PPO plans tend to be a little bit more expensive, and PPOs are ones where you can go out of network. They tend to have more group options within them, and HMOs tend to be, one or two groups, and it's based on who your primary care provider is. So it's sort of a downline of providers. If I choose ABC group, then my OB also has to be an ABC group, and my podiatrist and my oral surgeon, all that has to be in the ABC group. And then if I choose DEF group, then everybody's in the DEF group. That's an HMO. But most of us, when we're making those decisions, it's about cost. We know this. We're being very realistic about this, that we know most of us decide what insurance we're going to have based on what is affordable to us. And this is where I would implore you to think about where you can make an investment. If as you're signing up for open enrollment that I'm going to be getting pregnant this year or trying to get pregnant this year, to make an investment in a higher level plan based on what is going to provide you with the most options, if you can. And the great thing about PPO plans and the more expensive sort of tiers is they also help with fertility. So they can also help with the journey into becoming pregnant, where HMO plans tend to be very, very limited in those type of services that they provide. And what I tell families is if you're okay with sort of a smaller group of options once your baby gets here, again, that's a life change. So you can always downgrade your plan to an HMO once baby gets here and then go back to a PPO when it's time to get pregnant again. You can kind of maneuver around if you know how your system works, what your open enrollment looks like, what your life change looks like, all of that stuff. I even had a family that had a certain provider at a birth that was not good. And when I went to their postpartum visit, I was like, oh, what's that? Your insurance packet? You already have it? Open enrollment? Cool. Let's open it up and take a look at the providers inside. Oh, look, one of our favorite solo practice providers is right here. Guess where you're going next pregnancy? And they were so happy to be able to have that conversation and sort of think ahead about how to set them up for success to have a different experience the next time around. But if they had doula support and had this sort of information back when they got pregnant with this first baby, they may have found themselves having a much better birth experience with their first baby.
It's one of those things that we aren't even thinking about if we're like, oh, I'll be getting pregnant in 2 or 3 years, and you're going to be in the same area. Right now is the time to contact doulas and midwives in your area and say, who are the best providers? Where's the best hospital for the lowest C-section rate? All that stuff now, ahead of time, because when open enrollment comes, you're going to know where that provider is covered in your insurance. And you don't think about it until, well, I've always had the same OB, so I'm just going to go to my same OB because they're so great. We call that vaginal loyalty. There's no reason for it because a lot of times our favorite OB is not great at the kind of birth you may be wanting. They totally might, but just because you've been with them for 13 years since your first pap smear at 16 does not mean they might be the end all be all for what birth you want.
Yeah. And you hit the nail right on the head. That was going to be the next point that I was going to make was you need to start doing your research and thinking about what type of birth you want. And generally speaking, facilities that have the most options are going to work like, let's say they quote unquote have the lowest C-section rate or the highest natural birth rate or whatever it is. Even if you're like, medicalize me, epidural
give me all the
from
drugs,
the head down, you're still more likely to have the most choices and the best outcomes, even if you're not pursuing a natural birth. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. The other thing is Yelp. We live in the age of reviews, right? So Yelp reviews, Google reviews, Facebook reviews. Listen to what people are saying about their experiences at these facilities. Don't go on marketing, right? We all know the facility with the marketing campaign, the commercials on the radio, the stork on their building that you're like, oh, babies are born there. And that may not be the evidence-based supportive facility that you think it is. And so
can I just say from personal experience in our town, we have one that has bought all the keywords of doula, natural birth, midwives, all that stuff. They are not the facility that you want to be at if you want a vaginal birth.
Yeah, when you Google doula Southern California, this hospital comes up. They don't like doulas, but they bought that word so that they could be at the top of your search. So read reviews. Like, don't just go based on what pops up on Google. Go to the Google reviews. Go to the Yelp reviews. I feel like it helps so much to see people real time expressing their experiences. And sometimes you'll even see the hospital trying to comment like, please call us and talk to us about your experience. But you want to go based on what people are saying about their experiences there. Remember that you would read these reviews if you were buying a TV, if you were looking to buying a car, you'd be reading consumer reports and listening to what people had to say about it. You would be doing so much research. We want you to put that minimal research you would put into buying a TV or a car into where you would have your baby. We're talking about your body and the body of your baby that are on the line here, as well as your mental, emotional, spiritual well-being that goes into having a baby. So it's so, so important to know what your options are in your area. And again, like Kara said, it really is a privilege. I was sharing with her before the podcast that the town that I was born in, that my mom was born in, there's one hospital, at least there was. And so everybody went there and everybody went to the one, maybe two OB practices in town that delivered at that hospital. And that's it. There were not a lot of options, but we also know that there are more and more options coming available all the time because we are a consumer-driven society. And when people are not happy, they will look for options, pursue options elsewhere. And so it starts with knowing that you have a choice and looking at what your options are.
Well, and I know that, and I've heard this from, there's some pretty medieval laws going into play across the country. And I have had women contact me saying, I'm actually going to go stay at my mother's in this state the last part of my pregnancy in order to birth at this kind of hospital. I'm going to go stay with my sister because there is no way I'm staying in this town with XYZ that's going on. Or there are no OBs here. They've closed them down. People have left. And it is scary in our nation right now with where am I supposed to birth and who am I supposed to be with? And choosing your hospital is a crucial part of where you're going to have the best experience. So if you have options, in California, we have a website dedicated to the cesarean rate. What's the name of that website, Ashley?
calhospitalcompare.org.
So you can go in there, look at the cesarean rate. The reason you want to look at that, if they have a 50% cesarean rate, what does that tell you? That's the culture of the hospital. That is not because they only take high-risk families and they deliver a lot of multiples and a lot of sick babies, because the C-section rate in the nation is comprised of first-time families that are low risk. So if an OB provider says, oh, it's because we have all of the sick babies in town. No, that is not how you comprise the C-section rate. So that's not a truth. The truth is low-risk families that are walking into that hospital have a 50% chance of a cesarean unless They know that ahead of time. If that's your only choice, right? You're going to get educated. You're going to have the right support. You're going to stay home longer than get in there earlier, and avoid induction unless it's medically necessary, which induction's offered to everybody. Oh my gosh, that's just it's going to be offered to you. That's why we created our induction class, because that is just a thing we do now to manage care. And it leads to more interventions and more things that can get you towards a cesarean. So you're definitely going to check the hospital cesarean rate. You're going to check your provider cesarean rate and their practices. You're going to check their episiotomy rate. There's a lot of things. And if you don't know what an episiotomy is, it's a cut as the baby's coming out that you want to avoid. It is not evidence-based. It is very rare when it is needed. One of our birth centers in town has delivered 12-pound babies without any episiotomy at all, because they're patient, they allow the tissues to stretch, and they are giving the right kind of counter support to allow that baby to emerge through. It is a very non-evidence-based practice. A lot of doctors still do it. And that is something that you want the truth on, because you don't want to be cut down there. For those of you who don't really know your complete anatomy, your clitoris goes all the way down. So it's not just the knob at the top, the lobes go all the way down to the bottom. And if you are cut there, sometimes that can lead to never having an orgasm again. So we want to make sure that we stay intact as much as possible. A tear is much better than a cut in most cases. So slowing things down, another reason. You may also want to choose a hospital with midwives. And sometimes you're going to hear midwives versus medwives. I'm going to give you a little, because you're going to hear that on different podcasts. Midwives are more trained in more patience, I want to say, and slowing things down, other avenues and pathways to helping you be on all fours if that feels better, standing upright, slowing things down with warm compresses so that baby eases through tissues, things like that. Whereas a midwife, which I hate that word, but it does apply in some cases, is somebody who's very by the book and kind of typical, let's get this baby out according to whatever schedule I need to get this baby out on. But looking at a hospital with midwives versus without midwives, you usually have a lower cesarean rate. You have more client and patient, better reviews in that kind of a situation. And they do take more time with you in most cases. Now, this is going to be provider specific. You may have a midwife you didn't like. That could be a home birth midwife too. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Every provider is provider specific.
Midwives are vaginal birth experts. OBs are trained surgeons. That's what they spend the bulk of their medical training doing, is learning how to do surgery, because they need to know how to keep people safe when they're doing surgery. Guess what midwives learn how to do? Deliver babies vaginally. It's the only thing they do. So you have someone who is an expert in getting a baby out the door that babies are typically meant to come out of. And if you want a vaginal birth, whether that's medicated or unmedicated, don't you want someone who's a specialist in the type of birth that you want? And like you were saying, if a hospital has midwives, they're influencing the culture and how the doctors practice in that hospital. Even if they're midwives, they still have more vaginal birth experience than those OBs have. So they are going to influence the cesarean rates, the episiotomy rates, and just the overall culture and approach to birth in that facility.
And we do have a teaching hospital here locally that has the second lowest episiotomy rate in the state. And I believe it is because we have midwives, right? They're not training OBs in that facility to do episiotomies. There's other ways to get babies out, right? Slow things down, take your time. And those OBs are also witnessing what the midwives are doing. So it's a great cultural learning experience for those OBs, because they're having a different experience than if they are at a high-paced, cesarean-heavy hospital. And once you've kind of figured out what type of hospital, if you have that choice to deliver at, there's also other options in your community in most cases. So we want you to look at community birth, which is birth center and home birth, which when you're first coming into birth, that sounds so foreign. I was terrified of that. I thought I was raised with midwives being witches in my community. Like, it was just not done, right? The people who birthed at home were the super crunchy ones that were doing something unlawful and probably birthing in their backyard with no sterile instruments. I don't know. It was painted a very bad picture as I grew up. And as I was in my birth journey, I realized that what I wanted was a more natural, friendly birth. And as I called the hospital, talking to the charge nurse with my birth plan, as I started listing everything off, she was like, nope, 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 you can't have any of that. And that was obviously 15 years ago. I couldn't eat and drink in labor. I had to be on continuous monitoring. I wasn't going to be allowed to not birth on my back, a limited food and water intake. I would be on an IV the whole time. Like, it was so medicalized, and I knew that's what I didn't want. And thank goodness that charge nurse stepped away from the desk and said, hey, I think what you want is a birth center. And I'm like, nope, do not. Nope, like hospitals, I'm good. And she said, my daughter and I went to a birth center, and it was Best Start here in San Diego, and it was amazing. And we had a water birth, and my grandson was born, and I was like, water birth? Like, that opened up a whole other pathway, right? So I did end up birthing there. It was amazing. My insurance actually covered it, which was a fluke, but that's what got me into birth work. But when I'm considering what I'm going to be doing with midwives, because I was really not okay with that, I realized, and we even put this in one of our free mini classes on how to avoid an unnecessary cesarean, when you birth at a birth center or a home birth, and for some reason you're with those midwives and you have to transfer into the hospital, you only have a 6% chance of a cesarean transferring from a home birth or a birth center. Whereas if you were a normal, healthy person, just like you were at home birthing with the midwives, when you walk into a hospital, you have a 35 to 50% chance for whatever the hospital's rate is. So how come if I'm birthing at a birth center, same kind of person, or at a home birth, my rate is only 6% to get a C-section if I transfer in? Because you've had quality care with a midwife, with a low risk environment. You understand your body better, maybe the process better, maybe how to advocate better. And a lot of times when you're transferring in, it is for things like exhaustion or something a little amiss with the baby, but not a tragedy, right? And when we think about, they have to transfer, we think, this dun, 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 music comes in the background. And that's just not the case. It's usually something, just mom needs a little more help, or she's exhausted or whatever. But your rate for a cesarean drastically drops when you've been cared for by midwives. That's something very important to know. Another thing with community birth options is when you're under state insurance, so if you're on Medi-Cal or Medicaid, the state covers birth centers. Why? Because the state knows it'll pay $5,000 for that birth, for you to birth there. Or if you are the same person going into the hospital, they're going to pay $30,000 because of all the stuff the hospital adds onto it. The state's best interest to save money is to have you birth out of hospital. Because if you're low risk, why am I going to spend 30 grand when I could actually spend 5? That tells you there's something amiss with our insurance companies, because they could be saving a lot of money, which then we could on our premiums, if they were covering out of hospital births. But a lot of them don't, which I don't know who's sleeping with who at the insurance company.
Well, because medicine is big business here in the United States, and they're tied together, and they negotiate rates with hospitals and all that stuff. Like, these big businesses work together. They serve each other more than they serve the patients. And it's funny that you mentioned Best Start, because when I actually had open enrollment, when my husband and I got married in our life change, I was like, I want you to get this insurance that your work has, because Best Start Birth Center's on there. And when I get pregnant, we're having a water birth. And I was so dead set on it. And then I got pregnant with triplets and did not have a water birth. But luckily, it still covered UCSD, which was that's our amazing teaching hospital in San Diego, where I was able to have a great experience. But I remember watching a documentary, Business of Being Born. I feel like that's going to get mentioned so many times on this podcast, and being like, I want to go to a birth center. And it was literally like a religious awakening, basically. And that's when I was like, oh, look at this insurance plan. This is what we're doing. And so I remember so vividly making that decision based on what was available to us before I even really knew any of this stuff.
That's so crazy, Ashley. Good for you for even thinking ahead at 25?
Yeah, I was a baby. Baby. But it's just, that's where we really want to make sure parents know that you do have these opportunities to make choices. Honestly, on the topic of state plans, in California, and actually I'm in Oregon now, when you get state insurance, you are offered different plans. So like in California, there's 3 different plans that you can choose from that have different providers on each plan. In Oregon, there's like 4 or 5 different plans that you can choose from. So you even still have choice within the Medicaid system to find what works best for you. And, for some people here, like in Oregon and San Diego, Kaiser has a really good reputation. Kaiser's a very common West Coast medical system. In other parts of California or the country, it might not be. So here, for a lot of people, Kaiser's a really good choice that they can get through Medicaid that has midwives, that has a very low cesarean rate. Even if you feel like, oh my God, I lost my job, I have to get state insurance, or I got this, great job, but they don't have insurance and now I have to go on Medicaid. So that means I have no options. Just like Care said, Medicaid in California covers birth centers. I think Medicaid here does as well. But just because you have to go on the state plan does not mean you don't have choices, because there's definitely options for sure.
And why do you think Kaiser has midwives? Because they have to pay for all the cesareans, right? So Kaiser has a pretty low cesarean rate in town for that reason. How do we get babies out without having to do surgery? So definitely look at all of that. And then when I think about the business of being born, which we will mention that, how many years ago was that? Like 15 years ago?
20 years ago.
Oh my gosh, a long time ago. You do need to definitely watch that. It has one of the best animations for Pitocin being given, because so many families are like, my baby didn't tolerate it. I don't understand why. When you see the cartoon of that, you'll be like, oh, I'm using my baby's head to ramrod the cervix to open up. Oh, that makes a lot of sense why that baby would be tired, because there's no break like there is in natural labor. Oh, there might be a reason to let my body just take over and do labor when it's ready, because it might be gentler for your baby and their situation. I will guarantee, and I should probably just make t-shirts for everybody, you will not stay pregnant forever. Your body will not forget to go into labor. Nope. So when you've heard that, it's not true. Have you ever met a person who's been pregnant forever? Nope. Never in the history of life. It's just not.
Are you touring colleges pregnant with your college student that you've been gestating for 18 years?
You guys, babies grow so fast that if you stayed pregnant, by the time that baby was 18, you'd be as big as a barge. Like you would have exploded many years ago. It's just not going to happen. So patience, that your baby knows when to come out. They do it in their own time. It's not going to forget. And I've heard a lot of my family say, oh, my doctor said I'm just not going into labor. No, not yet. You will go into labor. Okay. So I'm going to make you a t-shirt. If you need a t-shirt, this says that my body will not stay pregnant forever. And then I want to talk a little bit about free birth, because some people don't know what free birth is. I'm going to let Ashley kind of give you a definition of that. There's a lot of controversy with it. All I want to say is with free birthing, that's what we used to do thousands of years ago, because we might not have had anybody around to help us. Okay. If you're going to choose a free birth, that is your choice. You are an autonomous human being who has weighed the choices. And if you do that, you do that. So you're the one that's going to own that. Ashley, give me a definition of what free birthing is, because there are plenty of them.
Honestly, it's hard. Yeah, there's a lot of definitions because it depends on who you talk to, right? There are some people who are very religious about free birth that say it's you and maybe your partner having your baby. Some people still consider it free birth if you have like a doula or other support person in attendance. Some people say it's only you, no partner, no nothing, just you and your baby. But free birth is having your baby. Oh, and then that's the other part, right? Depending on who you talk to, it's whether or not you have medical care leading up to it, and then you just have the baby, or that you have no medical care. And depending on whose definition it is. So I will say that it's, even though it wants to be outside the system, free birth is incredibly political within its own sort of, the politics of it, because everybody has a different opinion on what it is, what defines it, how to do it correctly, all of that stuff. So I have a very hard time with the free birth sort of like industry / community, because there just is a lot of pressure on people to maybe make choices that they're not prepared to make, or that they are not doing anything correctly. But if you're going to be pro-choice includes birth as well. And we have to support people's choices in how they birth their babies, where they birth their babies. Just because someone would give birth in a hospital with an epidural up to their eyeballs and that's what feels safest to them, some people will never feel safe walking into a hospital, will never feel safe. They have medical trauma or they don't trust the system. I mean, especially when you think about what Black families go through in this country in terms of medical care, what BIPOC families go through in terms of medical care in this country, you can understand why they would not trust this system, any system in this country, because the way they're set up. So, you know, as far as we are concerned and the way we talk about free birth, you know, Kara and I probably would never have our babies without any medical support, or maybe Kara would now, but Kara when she had her babies wouldn't because she wanted all the drugs. But that doesn't mean that we don't understand that it is a valid choice for some people. And, you know, it's all about autonomy. All of these, whether you're choosing the hospital with all the medicine or having your baby in a yurt you built yourself in your backyard with no medical interventions, no medical support at all, is about choice. It's about autonomy. And I would just implore you that if you decide that you're going to pursue any type of out of hospital birth, but especially free birth, if you're taking full responsibility for your care and for your birth itself without any professional guidance, because really when we're defining free birth, that's what they want, is no professional guidance, no midwives, no doctors, nothing. Like, you are doing it on your own, trusting your instincts, trusting your body, that you really educate yourself about your body, about how things work, about what your options are. You know, get yourself as much support as possible. It's a very complicated topic. It really is. And as a doula, you know, I don't attend free births because in my state, the state I live in now and the state I lived in before, could be found as practicing medicine without a license if I knowingly attended a birth where there was no medical provider.
Which would jeopardize your freedom.
Right.
And the freedom of your family, because you could be in jail.
Yeah. So it's not that I wouldn't tell a family, like, that's amazing, definitely do that for yourself. And there are some doulas who are totally fine taking that risk because it's so important to them to support these families in these journeys.
A lot of them are called birth keepers rather than birth doulas. Yeah. So definitely look that up if that's what you're looking for, that kind of support.
Yeah. And then, you know, just to be completely honest, be very discerning about where you get your information, just like we want you to be discerning about the hospitals that you choose or the doctors you work with or the midwives you work with. Be discerning in the information you're going to take on in terms of, you know, setting yourself up for success in your free birth.
And my thing with any kind of birth, whether it's hospital, home, free birth center, you need to be solid in the education. And if you're going to own a birth by yourself, you need to know about neonatal resuscitation. You need to know about what signs to look for that your baby's okay. You need to know about yourself and what signs to look for hemorrhage and things like that. So you still definitely need a ton of education and the right support on the outside. So I don't care if you're birthing in a hospital to home, however you're going to birth, any undertones in the Facebook groups you're in, the education that you purchase, whatever, it needs to feel safe and free of fear. Because the whole point of education is to instill safety within you knowing your body, that you can make choices, all that kind of stuff. If the undertones of any support person are fear-based, that's not supportive to you. And, you know, when we talk about heavy topics, sometimes it sounds like there's all this fear that you need to grab a hold of. I don't want you to grab a hold of the fear. I want you to look at the fear as curiosity, like, why is that scaring me? What is going on that I need more education around? Because once you have solid education around whatever is instilling fear in you, that's going to calm that fear receptor down. You know, you're 5 times more at heightened state of fear as you're pregnant because you're trying to read the room for threats. And so what we need to do is be figuring out what those threats are and then getting education around them so it quiets those voices. That is all for your protection. Fear is your friend in that case because it's trying to protect your baby, right? Your young. That's instinctual. It's biological. It's from the beginning of time. So really look for what I'm nervous about. Why am I having fear about this? And then how do I find the education that calms that down, or find the professional or the childbirth educator that helps me make sense of all of this? Because wherever you're going to birth, you need to be in a solid state of calm so that it goes well. And it goes well however it goes, because your baby is reading your fear. They're reading catecholamines and stress hormones, or they're reading joy and love. So definitely the education is going to be a big piece no matter where you birth. But really guard yourself from the Facebook groups, because man, ladies.
Yeah, know that it's not all or nothing, right? It's like, even if I'm planning a hospital birth, I don't have to be in the Facebook groups and on every page of people that are like, everyone should get an epidural and everybody should birth in the hospital. You don't have to be all in on hospital births. And the same is true for home births and free births. You can join the groups that give you the peace of mind, that are comforting to you. But if there's infighting, if there's negativity, if there's unkindness, if there's hate speech, not every crunchy group is the right amount of crunchy for you. Not every free birth group is the right free birth group for you. And it's not just groups, it's Instagram accounts, it's Facebook pages. You don't have to take on all of it. Like, as a doula, I support hospital births all the time. I don't love every hospital. I support home births all the time. I don't love every home birth midwife I've ever worked with, right? Some are right for their families. Some practice in ways that I'm like, oh, I don't like that. So again, it goes back to being discerning about what is nourishing me as I'm moving towards this birth of my baby. And if it's creating fear, if it's creating negativity, if it's bringing something up at you that you're like, oh, this does not make me feel good, let it go. Right? Maybe that's not the crunchy birth group you need to be in. Maybe this is the one you need to be in. Maybe stop following that page on Instagram,
And what's amazing to me is, like Ashley, I've had providers that I'm just like, oh, that provider. But at the same time, I'm honoring your choice. That is who you feel safe with. Fantastic. I also will not sugarcoat what I have witnessed. I'm not going to say all the tragical things that I've had with that provider, but I am going to say watch for, because in my experience, because I'm never going to let you go in without an understanding that it's a pattern, because you've hired me to do a job. You've hired me to be honest with you. So I will not sugarcoat it. But I also don't want to instill fear with you, but I don't want you to walk in to something that you're not prepared to handle if that's your provider. But honor your choice in everything. You can choose your provider. You can choose your insurance. There's just a lot of choices ahead of time that will really help you pattern the kind of birth that you want. Sometimes you don't even know what kind of birth you want yet. Maybe start watching some documentaries. Maybe start talking to people who've actually had good births. Because right now you're probably getting all the, you don't get a medal if you don't get an epidural, and, just schedule your ski section. It's so fast. You get back to work in 6 weeks. You're going to hear all of that. And that may be exactly what you want, but it might not be, because you never open yourself up to other options and choices. So I think if there's one thing that can be very overwhelming in pregnancy, is there's too many choices. I can't make any. And so we just stay in one lane. And staying stuck in your fear is also a choice. If you can do a lot of this before you're pregnant or in the early days of your pregnancy, it will save you a lot from the overwhelm that happens at the end of pregnancy.
100%.
And on our next episode that goes along with this series, we're going to be talking about consent. I hope you'll join us next time.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.